Upon entering the building from the west, a visitor is immediately greeted by a small ball mill. However, to understand the mill according to its process flow, we need to work our way up to the ore dump and then follow the journey back down. A brief diversion to this now empty room at the northeast corner reveals a trio of large foundation structures. Our best guess is that these previously housed either a backup generator, or more likely, the air compressor for the mine. The passage of ore through the mill begins here, at the ore dump. Blasted rock was trundled out of the Santiago mine in carts. It then came down the rails, past the assaying shed, over a trestle that has since collapsed and been removed, and was dumped in this chute at the top of the mill. The ore passed over this iron grill, which is called a grizzly. Any fragment small enough to pass through the grizzly was allowed to drop directly into the ore bin below. Anything larger had to pass through a gate at the bottom and into the jaw crusher. From the crusher, it then dropped into the ore bin. The ore bin acted as a buffer to hold a large amount of material so that miners could work in shifts in the mine, while the mill, if necessary, could process continuously. We're fairly sure this odd rectangular box was a speaking tube. We saw the top half up by the jaw crusher. We also saw its general shape while walking up the balcony. The idea here is that someone watching the main floor of the mill could provide instructions to someone up by the crusher, or vice versa, and be heard over the general din of motors, water, and clatter.
Gemma's still sleeping?
Yeah. Yep. Underneath the ore bin, we find an ore feeder and the remains of a transfer belt that moved ore to the ball mill's feed hopper. As the ball mill turned, a rotating scoop in the feed hopper would agitate a mixture of small rock, sediment, and water, which was then fed into the mill. Inside the mill, steel or iron balls in the range of 2 to 4 inches in diameter for a mill this size most likely, were tumbled in solution and bashed the ore into a slurry known as pulp. On the output side of the ball mill, a sifting screen with an internal screw auger is visible. The auger would rotate back toward the ball mill and collect any heavy gravel that tried to escape too early. Anything small enough to clear the screen, or which overflowed from the open end of the screen assembly, was sent over to the rake classifier. The classifier runs a rake assembly down into the slurry, draws uphill, then lifts out and repeats. Now it's coming up over, and in a second it'll free drop. There you go. Anything heavy enough to be carried uphill by the rake gets sent back into the ball mill feed hopper for regrinding. Anything that overflows the bottom is sent down to the flotation cells. Curiously, there is one other flotation cell up on this deck and we haven't quite figured out a feed path for it.
There's all kinds of leaves.
Oh, here he is, Aaron.
Trying to back that?
Yep.
You're chirping?
No, it's the camera here.
Oh.
Stinks too. This particular cell has been taken over as a guest house. It's possible that it was calibrated for small batch processing of unusual ores. There's a block of an inline 6 over here. The flotation stage is a series of tubs into which pulp, water, and a small amount of chemical reagents are mixed together. The drive pulley at the center would pull in air and bubble it up through the solution. The desirable sulfide mineral compounds would bind into a foamy froth that collected at the top of the bath. Finally, rotating skimming trowels at the front would pull the foam into a discharge trough, and the material would be dried out into concentrate that was ready for processing by a smelter. During the early years of the Santiago's operations, the nearest smelter would have been located in Idaho Springs. Actually, some of this stuff over here is remnants of the old tram.
Oh.
I suppose he's collecting leaves for
Food?
food.
Either that or he's got multiple friends. Maybe there's a colony here. The lower discharge from the flotation cells was given a final pass over this Wilfley-style shaker table. It functions like a large gold pan. While the table vibrates at an angle, water flows across the table and its formed riffles. Any free-milling metal content gets caught in the riffles, along with a minor amount of heavy waste, and this concentrate moves laterally to one side of the table for capture in a bucket or trough. Lighter waste materials continue over the riffles and end up in the discharge trough. These tailings were now depleted of valuable metals and sent out to the settling ponds down below the mill. Tailing waste from all processes, and the overflow water from the main storage tank, were all collected in this wood trough at the lower level and then entered a floor drain structure. The drain discharge is not visible outside the mill, so there must be a subgrade drain pipe that empties to the settling pond somewhere downhill.
Okay.
This here may have been a semi-submersible pump. What or why is lost to history. There's another pump sitting nearby, along with black polyethylene pipe that's considerably newer than most other things here, suggesting the mill was still being retrofitted up through the early 1980s when it finally shut down. Finally, we have the concentrate bins. The closest one to the stairs was collecting concentrate from the upper level flotation cell. The middle one was collecting concentrate from the main flotation, and the furthest one doesn't appear to be used in the current scheme. The goal of these bins was to let excess water drain out of the concentrate by pressing if necessary, both to make it more manageable to package and load onto a truck, and to ensure that the trip to and through the smelter was as efficient as possible.
Having been told that the Santiago mine, 2 miles above Waldorf, was being worked and that we could drive to it, we once more urged the Ford up the cruel grades. Just as we had maneuvered into a position where we thought it safe to park, an empty ore truck droned up to the platform and came to a grinding stop. "How did you get up here?" asked the driver. "Not in that car. Very few can make this grade." We chatted with him as he pointed to other mines nearby. "Be sure to visit the Santiago Mill," he called after us as we started back toward Waldorf. Following his suggestion, we detoured a quarter of a mile to the mine proper. Cars were parked alongside of the mine office, and electric lights burned in all of the sheds and lighted the mine tunnel. The men at the mine seemed pleased that we had come up there and showed us all through the gold mill. It was running at full capacity and the interior was noisy, dusty, wet, and alive. This made it exciting in a way quite different from the many empty and deserted mills through which I had so frequently prowled. We hated to leave the Santiago and the feeling that we were on top of the world.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining me again on my YouTube channel. This has been another episode of HMGM, How to Model a Gold Mill in 27,000 Easy Steps. And speaking of our model, here's the gold mill. The Santiago Mill was built in 1935 and operated until partway into World War II when it had to shut down. After World War II, sometime in the 50s we believe, it was reopened again, and the last owner-operator was Douglas Marshall of Georgetown, who operated it until sometime in the earlier mid-80s, and after that it was closed permanently and abandoned. As we saw by the quotes by Muriel Sibell Wolle, though, she was there when it was only about 7 years old and it was a hive of activity. But today, by comparison, we see what it is. Looking at the condition of it, I wanted to pull in just a couple little Bible verses because I've been trying to keep that off and on going in the background of this here. From Ecclesiastes 3. Think about this. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill, a time to heal. A time to tear down, a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet, no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. This year had a beginning. It also had an end. And it almost had a final end about 2016 or so when the ore dump started to blow apart in the wind. If the Forest Service hadn't come in and fixed that again so that it could be preserved, well, it would be deteriorating rapidly from this point, because once a building loses its roof, that's pretty much it. But yes, someone has come in. There's been work done to it. It's being preserved as an interpretive historical site. And according to a local group in Georgetown that has taken an interest in it and is trying to help that process along, the Santiago Mill stewards were there this past September when we visited again, and they said that in about the 5-year time frame, maybe 10, the Forest Service is going to be actively working to put in some trails, some signage, and some viewing windows on the mill itself. But unfortunately, it looks like no one will be allowed in the mill again for the indefinite future. So, hope you enjoyed that footage. That may be some of the last that is ever captured in this mill, but in the meantime, we got all the information we finally needed from that footage in order to really get our model building exercise going forward. So, huge amount of work has been done on the foundation, and we've started doing the carpentry. Looking forward to showing you some of that in a future episode. Here's a quick teaser that might give you an idea where we're going with this. Compare what we started with in the last build episode we published to where it is now, and you can see that there's going to be some interesting things to show you. So, we'll see you again on this channel whenever we get around to putting out that next episode. Thank you for joining us again today.
Has anyone seen my phone?